Welcome to a very special edition of Meet the Press Now, live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. I'm Kristen Welker on day 3 of the action here in the Windy City on what the Harris campaign is dubbing, quote, Walz Wednesday. You can see the vice presidential nominee doing his walkthrough on the stage earlier today as he prepares to introduce himself to the country and as Republicans ramp up their attacks on him. Ahead of Governor Walz's keynote, we'll hear from some Democratic heavyweights, including former President Bill Clinton and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It comes after Walz and Harris made a brief appearance at last night's convention remotely while rallying supporters in Milwaukee. Harris telling packed arenas in both cities that she and Walz were, quote, honored to be the party's nominees. And capping off the night, 2 of the Democratic Party's most popular figures and electrifying speakers.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling fired up.
America, hope is making a comeback.
In back-to-back speeches, the Obamas framed Harris's candidacy and the momentum around it as a continuation of the hope and change movement that rocketed Obama to the White House 16 years ago. Both the former president and former first lady also warning the party against retreating into familiar fights over polarization and division.
Our politics have become so polarized these days that all of us across the political spectrum seem so quick to assume the worst in others, unless they agree with us on every single issue. We start thinking that the only way to win is to scold and shame and out-yell the other side. And after a while, regular folks just tune out, or they don't bother to vote.
We cannot be our own worst enemies. No. See, because the minute something goes wrong, the minute a lie takes hold, folks, we cannot start wringing our hands. We cannot indulge our anxieties about whether this country will elect someone like Kamala instead of doing everything we can to get someone like Kamala elected.
But perhaps what stood out most last night were their repeated and frankly blistering attacks on former President Trump.
I want to know who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs.
It has been a constant stream of gripes and grievances that's actually been getting worse now that he's afraid of losing to Kamala. There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
Joining me now is our team, NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell on the convention floor. Vaughn Hilliard is in North Carolina, where former President Trump spoke this afternoon. And with me on set, of course, is NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. Kelly O, let's start things off with you. You have been reporting on what we can expect to hear from Governor Walz tonight. Obviously, his challenge is really filling in the blanks. Who is Tim Walz? What are you hearing about what we can expect to hear from him?
Well, Kristen, advisors tell him to acknowledge that. Treat it like a blank slate, that the country probably doesn't know much about you, so tell the whole story. And they will do that in a couple of ways. They will emphasize his life of service as a teacher, as a coach, as someone who spent 24 years in the National Guard and then chose to serve in Congress and as governor of Minnesota. Part of what will be different is they are not having Gwen Walz, who is his wife and the First Lady of Minnesota, introduce him. Instead, they'll have a student do that, and they are having Gwen Walz narrate a video that will tell us a lot of those pieces about the dad, emphasizing the rural roots, and some of the personality stuff to introduce Governor Walz in a way that they hope will be relatable. We were able to get an exclusive advance clip of that. Here's a portion of it.
Then Tim's students inspired him to to run for Congress in southern Minnesota. Tim spent a lot of time working with Republicans, fighting to help farmers and expanding veterans' benefits. Whether it was in Congress or as governor, his focus has always been helping working people like those he grew up with.
Part of the intent is for Tim Walz to be someone who can speak to rural parts of the country, the blue wall states, and to be someone that is relatable in some ways that maybe Democrats have had a harder time trying to attract, certainly in the Trump era. And part of his challenge will be to also make the case for Kamala Harris. So expect that to be a big part of what he needs to do tonight. I'm told it will be a personal speech and a patriotic one, and it will certainly be one of the biggest nights of his life. Kristen?
It certainly will be, Kelly. You know, it's interesting because Governor Walz and Vice President Harris didn't exactly have a very close relationship prior to her picking him to serve as her running mate. Where do things stand now, and how will that be on display tonight, Kelly?
Well, one of the things that advisors have talked about is that he has been known to the party. He was the head of the Democratic Governors Association, and people were tracking some of the policies he was carrying out in Minnesota. So known to the party, and then so much of it about the personal connection and chemistry that they were able to build. Also, when his team made him a surrogate prior to Kamala Harris even becoming the nominee, and seeing what he was able to do in telling the Democrat story on cable news and elsewhere helped to advance his case to make him a top choice among the shortlisters, then ultimately her actual choice for running mate. So part of what I've also been told is that the people around Kamala Harris have noticed from the first moment of their interactions that he is Governor Walz, quite comfortable playing a supporting role to Kamala Harris, not feeling like he has to be the lead of the ticket, not feeling like he has to outshine her, but to try to complement what she brings to it. And that, of course, is an asset in the very abbreviated race that they are looking at.
Yeah, and they really highlighted that in their initial rollout in Philadelphia. Kelly O'Donnell, thank you so much for that.
Are you ready, Vance?
Let's turn to Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, 76 days from Election Day. We just heard from former President Trump. Talk about the key takeaways.
Kristen, I think the top takeaway is the number that you just mentioned, 76 days until Election Day. And why is that pertinent? Well, 4 years ago, we learned that Election Day was really just the beginning, and that for the next 2 months, the transfer of power was more than rocky, but it was violent. On January 6th, there were hundreds, thousands of individuals who attacked the U.S. Capitol to try to stop the certification of Joe Biden's win and from him taking the White House. And that was due in large part to Donald Trump making the claims repeatedly that the 2020 election had been stolen. And in these last weeks, we have heard Donald Trump begin to lay the foundation for the ability to claim in 2024 here, just 2.5 months from now, that this election is stolen from him. And quite explicitly on this stage here, just a few moments ago, Kristen, Donald Trump, he said explicitly, our primary focus is not to get out the vote. It is to make sure they don't cheat, because we have all the votes we'll need. You can see it, all the houses along the ways with all the signs. We have the numbers. And so Donald Trump, at a time in the last weeks in which he has openly questioned whether the crowds that Kamala Harris is garnering across the country are real, and also the reality that he has argued that the New York case against him amounts to election interference. He's also claimed that Google is interfering in this election. Donald Trump here telling the crowd that he has the numbers to win this election, and all but essentially stating that the only way that he would lose this election is if the other side here cheats. And so I think this has been a very difficult month for Donald Trump, watching his poll numbers flip with Kamala Harris going to the top of the ticket. And we are now watching him in real time, effectively laying the groundwork to claim that the 2024 election is stolen. So really, Donald Trump is saying it very clearly that his effort is not towards trying to get out the vote at this point, because he feels like he has the numbers, and he is highlighting the idea that this election would potentially be stolen again, as of course he falsely claimed the 2020 election was.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard, thank you so much for that from North Carolina. As you've been talking, we've been listening to a sound check here. Stevie Wonder He just wrapped up, I think. Can we see him on stage? Yeah, we can still see him there on stage. We should say that we saw John Legend doing a sound check earlier today. So things are really getting underway. The energy is building here inside the United Center. And I am here with Chuck Todd to talk about all of it. So here we are on day 3. Chuck, before we talk about what you're expecting tonight, let's talk about what happened last night.
Yeah.
The fact that we saw Michelle Obama, who frankly we have never seen before. What did you make of what we heard from her and from the former president?
Well, look, she's had a lot to get off her chest.
Yes,
okay, and that's what it felt like, right? I got some things to say, right? And we also know that there's a personal issue between her and the Bidens. And it's personal. It's not political. Yeah. It's not, we know it's personal. You guys want to Google what that is. I encourage you to do it. I'm not going to go down that storyline. But she wouldn't have been here if this were Joe Biden's convention. And so I think that's an important thing to understand, which made her early lines going, I'm feeling something finally, instead of the pit in my stomach. It wasn't a personal shot. Some people want to say it's a personal shot at the Bidens. No, it was a shot at the era that we were in. And the fact that she wasn't alone here. She was speaking to all those voters, the double haters, the people that couldn't stand the fact that it was Biden and Trump were the choices. And there were some, 70% of the country wanting different choices. So that's what I thought she is so good at, which is sort of getting out of the predictable left-right political paradigms. And, I think we sort of, there's almost this, well, of course she gave a great speech. And I'm sitting there going, she doesn't do this for a living.
Right.
Yeah, of course Obama gave a great speech. Of course, they did it for a living. Every 4 years, we all are reminded going, oh my God, this is one of the best public speakers in America.
Right.
And she's not, a practicing politician, if you will. So, look, I think she did it. She was sort of, she hit Trump with elegance.
She didn't go low necessarily.
Right. It wasn't high, but it wasn't like, below the belt.
Right.
It was this a little bit mockery, which I do think that both of the Obamas went there, and that's the biggest tone change from Biden to Harris, right? Biden was painting a picture of this dark, menacing Donald Trump. Obama's always treated Donald Trump as the Celebrity Apprentice host, right? I mean, going back to the White House Correspondents' Dinner riff back in 2011 to the, I've been amused at all the different euphemisms that were used today to describe the joke about crowd sizes that the former president made.
And the gesture that accompanied it.
Yes, and it was probably something a lot more people on television saw perhaps than some people in the room fully. You could see it was sort of like an on the way Homer, right? That's where some of them got it later. But that is the big tone change, which is, and Tim Walz has been doing that too. And I expect more of that. That's the through line I expect from last night to tonight, is that I think Tim Walz will continue the mockery of Trump versus the dark, menacing threat that Biden was always paying.
It's such a fascinating point, because Biden won with that messaging in 2020, but it seemed like people couldn't hear that anymore in 2024.
Like I think especially when the economy was crummy, right? You're like, well, it's all dark.
Right.
You're not more light.
Yeah.
That was the problem. Biden himself wasn't presenting light.
Yeah. So here we are, and you said Monday night really was official pass the torch night. Yesterday was Kamala Harris's convention starting in earnest. Tonight is a huge test for Governor Tim Walz. You have 4 in 10 Americans saying they don't really know enough about him to know whether they trust him or not. What are you going to be looking for tonight?
Look, it's a huge opportunity for him, And I actually, we haven't had this this least known of a running mate since Sarah Palin. And I think it's instructive to go back to Sarah Palin, because Sarah Palin electrified her convention.
Yeah.
Sarah Palin had a tremendous first 20 days. And yet she was also an unknown figure, so her mistakes were also could overshadow things. But she gave a terrific speech because she came at it as an every person, right? And that's what Walz, I think. So assuming that's the theme, she went with hockey mom. Right. He's going with, girl dad, right, type of thing. But I think there's something to that if the more he leans on being a public school teacher, being a coach, sort of growing up middle class, living a middle class life before jumping into the political arena. I think that certainly is going to connect with this room. People need to remember, a lot of the delegates are teachers.
Yeah.
The teachers union is always a huge, and so he's really going to play well in this room. But Kelly O'Donnell made a point earlier to me, and which was, hey, teachers know how to. They know how to explain things to keep the attention of people. Like, it's tough to get teenagers to listen to you. So that's probably a real asset to him.
That's a great point.
He will be speaking American, not necessarily political Washington.
Well, speaking of explaining things, and you and I were talking about this, obviously we covered the Obama administration together, and when he was running for re-election, Bill Clinton played the role of explainer-in-chief.
Right, particularly on economics, because Barack Obama could not run, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago because of the Great Recession. They had a twist. They changed the message to, are you going to be better off 4 years from now? From now. And that's what Bill Clinton helped do.
Yeah, and it seemed like former President Obama was taking that mantle a little bit, elder statesman, and starting to explain to people, here's why Kamala Harris will be better for you ultimately.
Well, and I really think what he did very well, and so did Michelle Obama, was separate Kamala Harris from the Joe Biden wing of the party. If you think about it, Obama was sort of the new fresh face. Progressives thought he was one of them. And I think he was not on any camp, I think, as it turns out. But he felt like he had to go with a little bit of the old guard, and so Biden was the old guard. You could actually see here, Biden was the old guard. He went with Kamala Harris. She was part of the, quote, new guard, or part of that. So this has always kind of been a fusion here, even though they're all, been working together. And I think that this is an opportunity Kamala Harris has, is to separate herself from Biden without being rude about it. Yeah. But to say, hey, I came up differently than Biden. I didn't come up through the political wars of the 70s. The most appealing thing about Barack Obama is that he didn't go through the wars of the 90s. And that's, I think, and the wars of the 90s so shaped the Bidens, the Clintons. And to this day, it shapes Hillary Clinton. You can still feel that. Biden is still sort of, you can feel that he was shaped by those culture wars of the 90s. Obama, that's what made him such a fresh face here. And I think that's Kamala Harris's possibility. And that's what Obama, I thought, really did well with last night, was making the case, hey, she's not a veteran of those old culture wars. She will go about this differently. Yeah, very quickly, because I'm getting a wrap. I know you are. We're learning RFK Jr. is going to make a speech on Friday, teasing the possibility of dropping out, maybe endorsing Trump. How big of a deal would that be? If he needs to hurry up and drop out to be relevant. Yeah. Because every day he was losing relevance. Yeah. Every day his numbers were shrinking. Every day his donors were going away. I don't think he has any juice left. Yeah. I'll be honest. The candidate switch took away 75% of his support that was at all Democratic. They're already back with Harris. What's left, I think, is gadfly vote. I don't think it even goes to Trump. I think this is a much ado about nothing now. I think this is gadfly candidate drops out. There's only coverage if we choose to cover it. Well, you called it first when there was a change at the top of the ticket that the third-party candidate just all go away. And it's mostly, there's always going to be 2 to 4% of the people not wanting major part, but that's the norm. Yeah. All right. Chuck, great to see you. Nice we'll be watching together tonight. Thank you for sure. Coming up next, a top Democratic Congresswoman from battleground Michigan will be here to talk messaging, momentum, and taking on Trump. But first, we're taking a look back at some of the memorable and historic moments from past Democratic conventions, like this one. 1960, John F. Kennedy accepting the nomination in what would become known as his New Frontier speech.
We are not here to curse the darkness. We are here to light a candle. As Winston Churchill said on taking office some 20 years ago, if we open a quarrel between the present and the past, we shall be in danger of losing the future. Today, our concern must be with that future. For the world is changing, the old era is ending, the old ways will not do.
History will remember Joe Biden as an outstanding president who defended democracy at a moment of great danger. And I am proud to call him my president, but I am even prouder to call him my friend.
And welcome back. That was former President Barack Obama with a tribute to his former running mate at the beginning of his remarks last night. In a notable turning of the page from night one of the convention, those comments from Mr. Obama were one of just a few mentions of the sitting president on night two. Joining me now is Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. She is chair of the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. Congresswoman, thank you for being here. We are going to chat in a moment. We're going to pause for a second to listen to Stevie Wonder doing a sound check. Yes, you don't often get to hear this. We're going to go to Stevie Wonder. We'll be right back with our conversation. That was the great Stevie Wonder doing a sound check. Congressman, we also saw John Legend doing a sound check earlier today. All right, we're going to have to just talk a little loud to make sure our voices are heard. Talk about the energy heading into night three. What are you anticipating to hear from Governor Walz tonight?
Well, I think tonight, Governor Walz, Tim, as I know, is going to introduce the country to who he is. I think he's going to be Tim. I've known Tim since the early 2000s. He and John were good friends, but I think the rest of the country needs to get to know him. We know that a lot of people don't know who he is, and I think they're just going to see real Midwestern roots.
Yeah. Last night, let's talk a little bit about it. It was electrified the crowd here. Let's start with former President Obama, who was arguably a little upstaged by the former First Lady last night. He acknowledged that himself. But, you know, he really tried to paint a difference a little bit between a Harris administration and a Biden administration. We didn't hear a whole lot about President Biden last night. What do you think he was arguing is the main difference between Vice President Kamala Harris and President Biden?
I think what he is trying to do was to focus all of us on the future. And as I've said, Joe Biden did a great job, but the Vice President has begun to lay out what her policy priorities would be. One, it is going to be economic. It's about helping people being able to afford their own homes or to rent, to address food at the grocery store. I mean, the economy is still real in many people's lives, and I think we have to do a real comparison between what she's going to do and how Donald Trump has stated very clearly what he's going to do. He's going to cut billionaires' taxes, and those corporations who want to locate overseas cut their taxes too.
And yet, former President Trump gets higher marks on the economy than Vice President Harris. What does she need to do to convince people in Michigan that she would do a better job? Because clearly she hasn't done that yet. I understanding her campaign is in its infancy.
It's early, but I want to say this. I think we all have a responsibility to. I quite frankly don't think this was, if you remember in 2016, I said Democrats did a terrible job of talking about trade. We all have to be talking about the economy. This administration hasn't gotten enough credit for what was actually accomplished, what was done in the bipartisan bill, what was done in the IRA. All of us have to be talking about the economy, what we're going to do to help address the inflation, but showing that compassion and empathy for people who are hurting. We need to understand people are still hurting.
Yeah. I want to play a little bit of what the former First Lady had to say. Get your reaction on the other side. Take a listen.
And our primary focus is not to get out the vote. It's to make sure they don't cheat. Because we have all the votes you need. You can see it. Every house along the way has signs. Trump, 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 Vance, Trump, Vance. And by the way, Vance is doing a great job.
Okay, so that was former President Donald Trump. I want to get your reaction to that as well. And just so that folks have a chance to really process what he said, our primary focus is not to get out the vote. It is to make sure they don't cheat. What do you make of that?
So I'm going to say several things. One, I am very worried about what happens after the election, and I have said that before to people. He has not agreed that he will accept the results of the election, and I think we all need to worry about people's trust in institution and what's going to happen. Two, I have always been crazy about signs and yell at everybody, look at the signs, and I'm reminded repeatedly, signs don't vote, people do. So that doesn't mean anything, and he does need to make sure he gets his votes out, and if his votes aren't there, which I'm hoping that they're not going to be, but taking nothing for granted, he's going to have to accept the real results of this election, and we need to be demanding that Republicans are going to accept the real results of this election.
If the election is close, though, let's say if Vice President Harris were to win, but it's close, do you worry that, again, you'd be in a situation like 2020? In other words, Adam Schiff has said the only way to prevent that is by a huge victory. Do you see it that way?
I think the First Lady tried to say that last night as well, that we do need to, because he will. Look, he's going to play that card. We've already seen him do it once. We saw January 6th. So people need to understand every vote matters. We need to turn out the votes, and the future of democracy is at stake in November.
You bring up the First Lady, so now let's listen to what the First Lady had to say last night. We do have that soundbite now. Let's take a look.
Something wonderfully magical is in the air, isn't it? Yeah. You know, we're feeling it here in this arena, but it's spreading all across this country we love. A familiar feeling that's been buried too deep for far too long. You know what I'm talking about. It's the contagious power of hope.
It's fascinating because it's almost as if she and former President Obama were trying to impose the hope and change message a little bit, to give it, if you will, to Vice President Kamala Harris. Did you see it that way? And also notable, obviously, she didn't mention President Biden.
I think I love President Biden, and we all need to. He was a great president. But now we are looking to the future, and we're not going to go back. We're not going to go back on a lot of things. That's Donald Trump wants to take us back on a lot of things. I think, look, if you're out there campaigning or out and about like I am at 20 events by the end of a weekend or 25, people are feeling more positive. They're feeling more energy. Donald Trump pits people against each other. He fans the fire of hate. We need to get rid of this. We can disagree agreeably. We need to bring civility back. And I think people are tired of this hatred and this bitterness and this bullying that's out there, and people want to feel better about each other. We can find a way to talk to each other in ways that bring us hope about our communities again.
Let me ask you, broadly speaking, there are only 76 days left in this campaign. In 2020, when Kamala Harris was running, she said that she supported things like defunding the police, banning fracking. The campaign has said no, she no longer stands by those policy positions. But does she need to explain how she got from point A to point B? Does she need to do a better job of that?
We need to look. Does she need to do a better job? The woman has transformed her life in 2 weeks, so that implies she's not doing a good job at defining who she is. We'll talk about those issues in the next few weeks and get the issues that are on people's minds out there. But Republicans are not going to define who we are on these issues. Democrats need to define and tell people who she is and who we are.
Very quickly, 2 months ago, you were very worried about Michigan. Where do you stand now?
I'm not on a sugar high. I'm not Debbie Downer. I'm Debbie determined. It is a purple state, and we are going to be purple until Election Day. And we cannot stop working until those polls are closed and every last vote is counted, which was 3 a.m. on the Michigan campus.
How's that for a slogan? Debbie determined. There you go. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Congresswoman. Really appreciate it. Always appreciate your perspective. Turning now to the scene outside this arena, where a pro-Palestinian protest is set to begin very shortly. It comes after some confrontations between police and protesters last night. Local officials say between 55 and 60 people were arrested during that pro-Palestinian demonstration, which was organized by a leftist group with military leanings. The protest began peacefully in front of the Israeli consulate, but soon intensified as protesters got unruly, ignoring calls to disperse and marching directly into the police line. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa covered last night's protest. She's at the scene of tonight's planned demonstration. Maggie, set the scene. What are things like there right now?
Yeah, so Kristen, you can see behind me, it's a very different scene from what we saw last night. I want to point that out. This is the Chicago Coalition for Justice in Palestine. These people were bussed in from mosques all over the Chicago area. They're planning here in the next few minutes or so, any moment now, to march toward the United Center, toward the DNC. We're about a half mile from there at this point. But contrast this peaceful rally to the video that we have from last night. Last night, the group behind that demonstration was called Behind Enemy Lines. That's that leftist organization with militant leanings that you were talking about. And when we say it started peacefully, we mean it was that way for like a couple minutes tops. They pretty quickly, as I said they would online, marched to and clashed with police. Latest numbers from Chicago PD, 56 people at that protest, which took over the streets of the west side of Chicago, detained. The majority of them cited for misdemeanors, cited for things like disorderly conduct and resisting police officer. 9 charged with misdemeanors. Well, we were told, Kristen, 2 police officers and 2 demonstrators were injured last night. So Chicago police hoping to kind of keep the temperature down today, as you can imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And Maggie Vespa, you have been out there throughout the course of this week. Thank you for your great reporting. Please continue to stay safe, my friend. Good to see you. Thank you for joining me. I'm joined now by my great panel. Here with me are 2 former Democratic members of Congress, Florida's Stephanie Murphy and New York's Steve Israel. Also joining us is Lonnie Chen, a fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University and a policy director for Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign. He is also an NBC News contributor. Thanks to all of you for being here. It's great to see you both in person here. Yeah, Stephanie, let me start with you. Let's start right where Maggie was, outside with the protesters. What has your reaction been to what has been unfolding outside, and has it in any way, do you think, overshadowed the sense of unity that is trying to be projected here inside?
You know, what we've seen outside is predominantly peaceful protests, and we are the Democratic Party. We respect American citizens' right to gather and to have free speech, and so I think that it is well and good that they are doing that. Inevitably, though, in the environment we live in, where people are seeking headlines and those conflict moments, there are going to be folks who aren't interested in that peaceful protest. And I think you saw a little bit of that last night, but I think on the whole, it hasn't disrupted the sense of unity. Every night you walk into this arena and you feel the energy and the unity and the forward-looking purpose for this party.
What have you gleaned from the speeches so far? What was your reaction to hearing the Obamas last night? And do you think that they can keep that electrifying tone heading into tonight with Tim Walz?
Well, look, if somebody had told me 5 weeks ago that it would take me 3 hours on a long line to get into the United Center for the Democratic National Convention, that members of Congress, former members of Congress, donors, activists would have to wait to get in, I would have said, what planet do you live on? I mean, we were ready to drape funeral crepe on this. We are seeing the most breathtaking consolidation of energy and optimism that I've ever seen in politics. And you saw it last night. You'll see it again tonight. I will say this. I may not be, I get Debbie determined and Debbie Downer. I'm not Steve Sanguine. I think this is going to be a very close election. There's a lot of runway, and we may not know who wins this until after Election Day.
I think you're absolutely, we're bracing for a potentially long week, that's for sure. Lonnie, let me get your take on what we've seen so far. It was so interesting during the Republican National Convention. The headline really was a party unified around Donald Trump. It was literally on the heels of the assassination attempt against the former president, and the room just felt completely unified and electrified. What do you make of what do you think Republicans are making when they look at what they're seeing here at the Democratic National Convention, the fact that it seems equally unified and fired up?
Well, I think it reflects the reality. You're going to have 2 very motivated political bases coming out of the Republican convention. We saw that with the Republican base of support. That continues to be the strategy of the Trump campaign, which is to drive up support with that Republican base and Republican-leaning independents. And coming out of the Democratic Party convention this week, there's no doubt you'll have a unified and energized Democratic Party. So 2 energized bases. They're going to go after a very, very small percentage of the vote in 6 or 7 states. That really really will be the formula for success. And I think this race has reset. And in some ways, the expectation coming out of this week for Republicans is that Kamala Harris is going to continue to enjoy a polling bump. Now, how much of that remains once we get into Labor Day and beyond, that'll be the big question and ultimately determine where this election goes.
Yeah, I think that it's such a great point because, you know, Steve, there's this big question. Has Kamala Harris already gotten her convention bump because of the way that the torch was passed? What is your take on that, and what are you anticipating tonight?
Well, ironically, she stepped on Trump's convention bump when President Biden decided to withdraw from the race. And look, we've had a bit of a monopoly on earned media over the past several weeks. We have dominated messaging. It's not always going to be like this. Trump will respond. They will respond with big TV buys in those battleground states. They will do everything they have to do to equalize this. And so I agree with Lonnie. This will matter more after Labor Day and will matter among that small segment of undecided moderate voters, the ones that you always knew how to win in Florida. They're just tuning in now. Yeah. And that's where the message is most vital.
Stephanie, what does Tim Walz have to do to win over those voters Steve's talking about?
I think he needs to lean into his personal story because what we have time for right now is to cement the idea that they share the same values as these swing voters and voters that rural, non-college educated white voters. Those voters need to know that these leaders have similar life experiences and care about them so that they believe that when they get elected, they will serve them.
You know, it's interesting because former President Trump has been railing about the fact that he has been mentioned so many times. I think the count is now up to 200. Do you think Democrats are over-indexing on focusing on him? I mean, it was extraordinary to hear former First Lady Michelle Obama take the gloves off. We've never seen that side of her before.
And here's why. A Democratic Party that is historically undisciplined on message has finally found somebody who can discipline us on message, and his name is Donald Trump. So he has been the one force in American politics that has made Democrats more pragmatic. They've suspended their individual ideological beliefs. If this is a referendum on Donald Trump, we turn out our base, and we also turn out those moderate independent voters in those swing states.
Lonnie, what do you make of the fact that there has been such a focus on Donald Trump? Do you think that that creates a bit of an opening for Republicans, or is it smart strategy for Democrats?
Well, this is actually a super important point because essentially what Democrats are trying to do is to turn this into an election that is a referendum on Donald Trump. Kamala Harris is a sitting vice president of the United States. But what they're trying to do is to make this about Donald Trump because they want to position Kamala Harris as the candidate of change. Now, that can be hard to do given that she has been in power for the last several years, presiding over the economic woes of many Americans that we've seen, the issues around cost of living. The Biden-Harris administration has been in charge the last couple of years. But this convention is trying to redefine the terms of this debate. And if they can do so successfully, I will say that it will inure to their benefit, I think, to turn this into a referendum as opposed to being about, you know, the referendum on the administration we've had for the last several years. And that's really the goal here. It was a race to definition. And this week is an effort to define Kamala Harris as the agent of change. And if they can be successful at that, then I think they will be successful potentially down the road as well.
Well, I want to ask you all about something that I just discussed with Chuck Todd, which is that we are learning that RFK Jr. on Friday is going to be delivering a speech about the path forward in his campaign, his running mate teasing the fact that he might drop out and endorse Trump. I want to play you a little bit of what J.D. Vance had to say responding to this news.
Well, look, I think clearly Donald Trump is not going to say, I'll give you a cabinet position if you give me an endorsement. But he's been working for RFK's endorsement because RFK represents, I think, an old guard of the Democratic Party that was patriotic, that was actually very supportive of American workers, and that unfortunately isn't very welcome in today's Kamala Harris-led Democratic Party.
Stephanie, what's the impact if he does drop out? Could it hurt around the edges?
I think the support that existed for Kennedy was that 2/3 of the American people said for over a year and a half that they didn't want to see a Trump-Biden rematch, and they were just looking for somewhere else. But now that I think now that Harris is in, a lot of those votes have already moved to Harris as the new candidate. The Democratic Party is the only party that has answered the American call for somebody other than Trump-Biden. So I'm not sure that it'll be a huge difference.
What's your take, Steve?
I agree completely. Big zero, inconsequential. It's not going to impact the election.
Lonnie, big zero? You think it has any impact?
Yeah, I'm not sure it matters a whole lot either. I mean, I think that some of this is already priced into the equation. It will be interesting to see, though, from a messaging perspective, how the Trump-Vance ticket will handle RFK and how they'll handle some of the issues on which RFK has been incredibly fringy, quite frankly. So it'll be interesting to see. But from an electoral standpoint, I mean, potentially in some of these states where the margin will be small, we'll see. But just because RFK Jr. endorses Donald Trump, I don't believe that people who were supporting him necessarily then by the property would translate to Trump either.
All right, great conversation. Thank you all for being here. Stephanie Murphy, Steve Israel, Lonnie Chen. Really appreciate it. Still ahead, as Harris and Walz work to introduce themselves to voters, there's still a lot we don't know about their policies and their priorities. Senator Michael Bennet will be here next to talk about that and much more. And as we go to break, another memorable DNC moment, this one from 1984 in this fiery speech by then Governor Mario Cuomo.
We must make the American people hear our tale of two cities. We must convince them that we don't have to settle for two cities, that we can have one city, indivisible, shining for all of its people.
I got Kamala's voicemail, and I just started rambling. Hey, it's Doug. By the way, Kamala saved that voicemail, and she makes me listen to it on every anniversary.
Welcome back. As we mentioned last night, we heard from second gentleman Doug Emhoff, and like many others, he looked to reveal a more personal side of Vice President Harris, even poking fun at himself when he told that story about an embarrassing voicemail he left her early in their relationship. But as we learn more about Kamala Harris, the person, questions still remain about what she would be like as a president. Joining me now is Democratic Senator from Colorado, Michael Bennet. Senator, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for making time.
We really appreciate it. Well, look, you were the first Senate Democrat to publicly say that Joe Biden couldn't beat Trump following the debate. How do you assess the state of the race right now, Senator?
I think the state of the race right now is incredible. I mean, we're sitting in a hall where Democrats are more divided than they've ever been. The excitement inside this hall, I think, is also transformational. And my hope is, and my belief is, that the feeling that's happening in this hall is a feeling that America has. I think America wants to turn the page on the last generation of political leadership. I don't think they want to go back to the chaos that Donald Trump particularly represented. Joe Biden did something incredibly patriotic that no former president has done. And now it's up to the rest of us, the Democrats that are in this hall, to make sure we deliver on what he has made possible. And I think Kamala Harris's, conduct over the last 3 or 4 weeks as the leader of our party has been extraordinary. We got to get enough of the American people to agree with us to make sure that we win this election, and I think we will.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about what we've heard so far. The speech that we heard from the former First Lady was in many ways the headline last night, because she spoke in such personal terms. She spoke so bluntly. She spoke so plainly. And the Michelle Obama, who in 2016 had said, when they go low, we go high, she seemed to dispatch with that. I mean, the gloves were off last night. She took on Trump directly. In fact, she took on Trump more forcefully than anyone at this convention has. Do you think that's the right strategy? And should Vice President Harris adopt that, or should she leave it to the Obamas?
Well, first of all, I would say, don't tell President Obama I said this, but I think Michelle Obama gave the speech at the convention, and it wasn't just the speech of her life. It was an incredible speech. And and I felt like she was letting us in to hear her critique of the politics that Donald Trump represents, the division, the hatred, the believing that only some people are entitled to be part of this country and not other people are entitled. And I think she shared that with the American people. She did us a favor by explaining from her perspective what that looked like compared to the set of values and the experiences that she was raised on the south side of Chicago by her mother right here, not that far from this hall. And I think what you saw, I think, her wrestling with was her own experience, probably, of the level of disappointment that we've had a president who is unable to embrace the kind of values that I would describe as, fundamental core American values. And now she has the opportunity basically to call it out, and I'm glad she did. She said some very important things last night.
Let's talk about what we might hear from Vice President Harris tomorrow night. She is going to give arguably the biggest speech of her life to date tomorrow night. The blanks are still being filled in terms of how she would govern. She has rolled out some economic policies. I'm told her speech is largely going to be biographical, introductory, to reintroduce herself to Americans, and it's not going to be heavy on policy. Do you think she should include some discussion of policy, though? Given this shortened timeline of the campaign, is it essential that voters find out how she would govern?
Well, first of all, this shortened timeline of the campaign, man, that may be something we want to look into. That is
You're not the first person.
It is not a bad way to run this show. But and I think it is good that she will share some of her bio because people need to know her. But look, in my mind, the economic stakes are everything here because we're living in a country that is suffering from a set of trickle-down economics that Ronald Reagan started. And today in America, the bottom 50% of Americans have less wealth than they had in 1980. The bottom 50% of Americans own 2% of the wealth in America, and the top 10% of Americans control 75% of the wealth. That has been the result of 40 years of trickle-down trade policies, economic policies, tax policies, and that's all Donald Trump brought when he was president. More trickle down, trickle down, trickle down. Kamala Harris represents something very different. The Biden administration represented something very different. And I hope she'll talk about things like the child tax credit, something she and I worked on together when she was in the Senate and when she was vice president.
You talk about the child tax credit. Of course, President Biden couldn't get that passed through Congress. How does she get that past her other priorities?
Well, he did get it passed briefly. And briefly, we were able to tell the world that we were able to cut childhood poverty in America by 50%, that we didn't have to accept it as a permanent feature of our democracy or our economy. And I believe, look, J.D. Vance is now running around telling people he's for a child tax credit that's $5,000. When Sherrod Brown and I wrote that bill, we never would have imagined that. So maybe people are grappling with the fundamental threat to our democracy, which I believe is economic immobility. Trump is a symptom of that problem. He's not the cause of that problem.
When you think about getting things done, obviously the fight is on for the Senate. I want to read you what NRCC Chair Steve Daines told NBC. He said, Senate Democrats need to pitch a perfect game to hold their majority, including in Ruby Red, Montana, and Ohio. We like our odds. You're obviously a former DSCC chair. How do you respond to that?
He might like his odds, and I understand why he's saying what he's saying. But we, in John Tester and in Sherrod Brown, we have all-star pitchers. Those guys are among the best candidates that we have ever run for the Senate. They find a way to win. The people in those states know them well.
They're not here. Should they be here?
I think they're doing the right thing, which is campaigning in their states. And they need our help. They need our help while they're campaigning in their states. John Tester and Sherrod Brown and the rest of our Jackie Rosen in Nevada, I can't go through the whole list. Our candidates are extraordinary. They're candidates less so, to be polite. And I think as a result of that, we're going to be able to hold the majority in November.
Senator Bennet, we'll see what happens.
We'll see
Thank
what happens.
you for being here. Really appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
Good to see you. We have some breaking news now. Two sources tell NBC News that third-party presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. intends to suspend his campaign on Friday and is planning to endorse former President Trump. Sources caution talks are ongoing. One of the sources telling us that both camps are working toward a joint appearance. It comes after a recent interview where Kennedy's running mate acknowledged they were weighing a potential exit from the race and a Trump endorsement. So we will continue to track that angle of this race and bring you any new developments as we get them. But again, Robert F. Kennedy suspending his campaign. And now to an historic moment from another Kennedy. When back at 1980s DNC, Senator Ted Kennedy lost a bruising fight for the nomination on the convention floor to President Jimmy Carter.
Those whose cares have been our concern, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die.
Welcome back. Joining me now is my NBC News colleague, Andrea Mitchell, of course, our chief Washington correspondent. Andrea, thank you for being here.
It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to cover this convention with you. What a fantastic experience for all of us. Andrea, talk about, if you would, what you are expecting to hear from someone who you have covered for quite some time, former President Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton tonight, his job is to bridge the past and the future, but he really is more of the past. I mean, you can't have a Democratic convention without inviting all the former living, able Democratic presidents. Bill Clinton tried to do that famously in 1996. He really didn't want Jimmy Carter. They didn't have a great relationship. He didn't want him at his midterm right here in Chicago, and he was talked into, peace in the family and all of that. Here, it's a much closer relationship. Hillary Clinton has had a growing relationship with Kamala Harris, has reached out to her. Harris, interestingly, reached out to Hillary to tell her right after the Biden decision to step aside, how important it was, everything that she had done, and give her the credit, the props that she does deserve. Hillary Clinton was a very strong speaker on the opening night of the convention. Good that they separated the two. They have different roles. So Bill Clinton is the character, the contrasts between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. He can speak to that and point out the strengths, her preparation, and he's now become sort of an elder citizen and a senior statesman, someone respected in the party.
Andrea, he played the role. We called him explainer-in-chief in 2012 for Barack Obama. He talked a lot about Obama's economic policies. Do you anticipate he'll play that same role? Is he letting Obama kind of have that role, and will we see him in a different role? What are you going to be watching for out on the campaign trail?
Well, on the campaign, I don't think he'll play that active a role. I think they'll all be pulling in the same direction. They'll take direction as surrogates for the campaign where they're needed. Key states, he could be helpful in a couple of states where he is very popular, and there's a lot of familiarity with Bill Clinton and fondness for him and for his role. I think Hillary Clinton could be very helpful for her, translating and reaching out to women. Bill Clinton could be helpful in red states and working class areas, places where Joe Biden would also be helpful. That centrist Democratic coalition.
And speaking of barrier breakers, we're also going to hear from former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, someone whom you've had interviewed and covered extensively. We heard from Hillary Clinton about breaking through that glass ceiling. Do you anticipate that Speaker Pelosi will also speak about this moment in historic terms?
Nancy Pelosi is a divisive figure to a certain extent, hugely respected by the House caucus. There's gratitude there because they did feel that Joe Biden had to step aside. That was what she was hearing. That's what she communicated to Joe Biden. She denies the reports that she orchestrated it, that she was a godmother, in a not very nice way. But she had a big role to play. And the fact that she is such a senior figure in the party. I think that at this point there is going to be an effort to try to heal those wounds, but there's importantly not been any outreach by the Bidens to her, and I don't think there's going to be for a while.
Andrea, no one knows more about all of this than you. Thank you so much for being here. Great to see you. Appreciate it. I am back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, live from Chicago on the final night of the DNC, but we have plenty more to get to. My colleague Hallie Jackson, sitting with me on set, picks up the NBC News coverage. Hallie, take it away.
Do we love the camera slide? I feel like it's a smooth
and we're getting
transition.
very good at it.
Girl, we got one more night left to do it. I can't wait. Kristen, thank you. Andrew, great to see you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.